Our first guest on Social Studies is Arturo Nunez. Arturo is founder of AIE Creative. AIE was recently created to provide immersive experiences to a highly curated selection of brands, looking for unique ways to connect with diverse customers. Previously, he was Chief Marketing Officer for Latin America for Apple, responsible for communications across all 38 countries with special focus on Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Chile. In 2012, Nunez became Vice President, Global Marketing for Nike Basketball, and was responsible for Nike's marketing vision and strategy, developing the campaigns and branding for LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Paul George. Sounds like my fantasy 2020 basketball team. Nunez has also held a variety of marketing roles for leading companies like Diageo, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, and Pepsi. He's a world traveler who grew up in Harlem and has since immersed himself in global culture, acted as a dedicated mentor, and built a resume that reads like War and Peace. Who better to provide insight into a world of advertising and activism on a global scale? Thank you for joining us, Arturo.
Stan, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, man.
Social Studies.
Yes, Social
Episode
Studies.
1, let's get it.
Episode 1, we're making it happen. So the whole premise of Social Studies is to study the parallels of advertising and activism, which you're the perfect guest for. And I'm just going to jump right into it because, you know, your previous experience with Apple, I really want to talk to you about one of the campaigns that they did, the whole shot on iPhone, and how it parallels into the culture of minorities. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how Apple created this beautiful narrative, creating these billboards across things to sell this high-ended, device, and it became this kind of like a way for the community to police their different cultures and police the police. And I'd just like to hear a little bit about like kind of your experiences of seeing that, and just wondering, like, did you ever foresee when that whole campaign was coming out that this narrative would go to that place of being a place for the community to use this device?
Yeah, I don't think Apple saw that. I think Apple was visionary in realizing how important photography was going to be going forward as they were launching new telephones with amazing technology. How the importance that the camera and photography took in the lives of most of their customers. Okay. So the Shot on iPhone campaign, I mean, really, at its core essence, is about beautifying the world through showing amazing images. Mm-hmm. It also served to make all of their customers photographers, right? Because it was a way to say these are user-generated photography, right? Mm-hmm. Which is powerful in itself. Mm-hmm. Letting people have their voice, their image, their visuals felt in the marketplaces that they represented. And I think that the advent of people documenting these crimes that took place was just kind of a byproduct of that, right? Everyone had a phone, the cameras got better and better, the technology got better and better, and so people were now using this to police the police and to, film these episodes that would have gone unseen 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay, so we look at this.
So it wasn't a deliberate attempt by Apple. Mm-hmm. Apple just realized how important the camera feature had become to the phones.
And now it's become a cultural phenomenon. I mean, like, you look at the Childish Gambino video, like This Is America, and he's talking about, I got a cell-in, and showing kids videoing that. And I want to talk about a very important part that you just mentioned, is it made everyone a photographer and everyone be able to document their vision. So then you've got these different cases where you have, Eric Garner being choked by the police. You've got Sandra Bland, who was arrested on a traffic violation and then basically met misfortune in a jail cell, which they still haven't, properly solved. You've got Phildo Castile, who was actually shot on Facebook Live, by having to conceal and carry as he was going to show the police officer that he had his concealed carry. And now it's created this whole way for communities to police the police. And so, what's your take on that?
You mentioned Eric Garner. Ironically, that case took a long time to resolve, to come to any conclusion with regard to any justice for the family of Eric Garner and the police officer, Daniel Pantaleo, who was just fired by the police department. So here's irony of irony. So he was acquitted in a case for using lethal force, using an illegal chokehold. And then I think the civil case hasn't come to a resolution yet around whether he used a legal chokehold and caused the death of Eric Garner. But he just got fired for using an illegal chokehold. So I don't understand how you get fired for doing something you didn't do in a criminal case, right?
And so that's where the beauty of piece.
And to your point, all captured on film
all
by a
captured on
bystander.
phones.
Who, by the way, my understanding is the bystanders caught nothing but hell from the legal system and the police ever since he took that ill-fated video of Eric Garner in his last moments dying at the hands of police. So super interesting that from a legal perspective, you know, he was adjudicated innocent in a criminal case, but then fired for the exact same thing he was you know, adjudicated innocent for doing.
Acquitted. Yeah.
So acquitted for doing. That's one case. The Philando Castile case, again, a guy was being given instructions by the police. He went to show the police his carry permit. The police thought he was going for his gun, and they shot that man. And his girlfriend filmed the entire episode while she was pleading with police not to shoot him. Again, with his daughter in the backseat of the car. So, just a craziness. Again, we would have never seen. Imagine what the narrative would have been had we not had the video about what happened in that case.
And so now, by putting that in a company that you've worked for, that as far as like an advertising thing has now become a voice and a way of showing our opinion. It shows two sides of the story.
Sure.
So now it's put this kind of like documentary piece in our hands.
The power of photography, right? The power of videos and visualization.
Yeah.
The fact that now we're seeing dash cam perspective, we're seeing body cam perspective, we're seeing, you know, people that are caught up in these situations, their own perspective on their phones.
Yeah, and
there's nothing illegal about filming the situation that you're caught up in. I heard recently that Sandra Bland's own video just got released, right? Yeah. So we had the dash cam view and the officer's perspective on what happened to in the Sandra Bland situation, where she was, just to be clear, she saw a speeding officer behind her with his lights on. She pulled over into the right lane of the road that she was on, and then she was stopped for pulling over without using a blinker. Further to that, the situation escalated when she refused to put her cigarette out or turn off her radio, both things that she had the legal right to not to do, right? And then that escalated into altercation with an officer that was all caught on video.
On his narrative.
Yes, on his narrative.
On his narrative.
And now we have the opportunity to see her narrative.
Because her iPhone footage was just released after the court case. So then all of a sudden it puts out the two sides to a story. Sure. And that's just the beauty of kind of seeing like that of like, now all of a sudden, like, you know, like shot on iPhone takes a completely different meaning, you know?
And I think the one intentional part of Apple was trying to give people in their hands powerful technology to tell their story.
Their perspective.
To share their perspective. Not only to capture their perspective, I think you used a pivotal word, to share their perspective. Because nowadays it's easier and easier not only to capture, but to share in seconds with the world your perspective.
Okay, so another interesting thing about that whole perspective and what we're kind of talking about and kind of segueing into it is like, you know, basically talking about how money and power determines how the narrative goes down in activism. So when we're looking at that, there was recently a family in Arizona who got arrested for their daughter suspected shoplifting case, and the cops came, guns drawn, on that case, and it was actually captured by innocent bystanders again. And here's the interesting thing, the perspective of that. So they did a civil suit against those police officers, and the person who actually got that lawyer for them was Jay-Z. So it's an interesting thing of looking at how perceptions of money and power and actually access to, you know, legal defense, basically having the money and power to defend your rights. And so without those, like this family, maybe they would get railroaded. Maybe their side of the story wouldn't get told. Without these iPhones showing their perspective, you have only heard the police officer's perspective of that. But now they're on suspension on that. So I think it's just an interesting narrative. And like, I'd like to get your take on that idea of how power and wealth can help dictate activism.
Have you ever heard of the story, the fable of the lion that was going through the jungle? And the lion was really hungry. And he came upon this camp, and he saw that there was food in the camp, and he attacked the people that were in the camp. He killed the people. He ate their food. He went and got the rest of his lion pride to join him in eating the rest of the food, and they were all fulfilled and satisfied. Have you heard that fable? You read that book before? No. Until the lion writes, the story will always glorify the hunter. You know what I mean?
Okay.
The lion doesn't get to tell his story.
Yeah.
Do you think that hasn't happened before? Of course it's happened before. No one's telling that tale. No one's glorifying that tale. They tell the tale of the mighty hunter going into the savannah, going on safari, and killing the animal, of course, all the time. but that's because the line doesn't get the right stories. Jay-Z, in that instance, made it possible for those people to tell their story. Otherwise, it would have been lost like the plethora of other stories, hundreds and hundreds of stories that we never hear about because people don't have a voice.
Okay, and in that transition is something I want to kind of get onto the next thing, is Nike, you working for Nike, working with LeBron, working with that brand, and how you've had a powerful entity be able to give people a chance to tell their story in a different way of like more than the athlete. Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that kind of world and kind of like things that you've done with LeBron and like responsibility to shareholders and making a profit, but also their narrative of shine the light onto, you know, community projects and activism.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Nike has historically done a pretty good job of is, you know, listening to the voice of athletes.
Okay.
So a lot of the stuff that Nike does, whether it's designing products or telling stories, communications, concepts, marketing of all types, comes from the voice of athletes.
Okay.
So how does the athlete want to express themselves? Okay. And sometimes it's beyond being an athlete, right? How do they want to tell their story? Nike uses information from the athlete to then tell a compelling story that creates an emotional connection between people and their brand. So I think they've done a great job of doing that in the past. I think a great example is the one that you just mentioned, you know, talking about LeBron James and him being able to tell his story, you know, which is still by no means over, but it's a story of this kid from Akron who, you know, the kid from Akron that does good, right? And now I think he's expanded himself as he's mature and grown. He's expanded himself to be way more than an athlete. He's in Hollywood telling his own stories. Well, he's got legacy projects like the educational program that he's doing with the schools.
He's got his own studio.
Absolutely.
Like it's like interesting of like that's the thing that's interesting as far as like activism and then actually making it profitable so you can go tell your other stories right there. He's got Blaze Pizza that he just opened up there. He just opened up his new studios like just down the street from me in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Right?
He's doing game shows. He's got some writer's remorse. Like,
yeah, because didn't he do just game show for NBC?
Yeah, he's done 2 game shows so far. Yeah.
So then you've got that. So then you've got also Space Jam. I mean, how can you forget Space Jam too?
But of
Space
course.
Jam. So you got
and
all
well
these
deserved.
different.
And well deserved.
Of course. Like I'm curious to see what cartoon characters are going to try and take him out and slam dunk on LeBron. But it's just interesting of like you need to have like to have a voice in activism. Profitability helps you extend your voice. And
yeah, so, I think one of the things, I mean, Nike's been a very powerful company in the world of sports. It's grown significantly over time. And one of the great pleasures for me was the opportunity to work at that company and actually tell the story of athletes, whether, you know, and I had 2 different roles. One was as the marketing head for basketball, so I got to tell a little bit of Kobe and LeBron and KD and Kyrie's story. But I also worked in emerging markets for some time where I told stories about Manny Pacquiao one day and the Brazilian national team the next, and Yuna Kim from South Korea, the figure skater, the next day. So, you know, the cricket team from India, you know, they were trying to win the Cricket World Cup, and I was actually in attendance when I did that in India.
Was that?
Oh, insanity! Just a nation of 1 billion plus folks.
So here's just something that's
bleeding
like,
blue.
Yeah. So how does Nike go and attract the culture in India? Like, I'm just curious. Like, I mean, like, how do you go about even just diving into that as far as
I think you know, it's always about, again, the voice of the athlete, the narrative of the athlete, young athletes, the perspective of young athletes. Nothing is more important to young athletes in India than cricket. We have the national team, the India national cricket team as a sponsored property for Nike. We went and talked to those athletes and talked about the things that motivated and inspired them. And then we told stories about how they came up and how they got inspired to play the game and what a honor and a privilege it was to be a member of the Indian national cricket team. And we timing is also essential. Yeah. We ended up choosing that narrative and following when they were on a historic run that ended in them winning a World Cup. Okay. So the fact, we could have done that in an off year where they didn't win. Yeah. We actually did it in a year where they actually won the World Cup and they won it at home. So it was pretty insane.
It was lit.
To
save the kids.
It was an India version of lit. Yes. The streets were on fire. It was chaos and mayhem. It was a lot of fun.
So here's the other interesting thing, and I think we were talking about the whole like taking a chance, taking a broad step in campaigns to do social justice, and we're looking at that, and we're looking at the whole Colin Kaepernick campaign. We're like, that whole campaign could have gone right or it could have gone wrong. You don't know how things are going to go, but then you look at it, and the sales after that, they jumped up to a profit of $847 million. on taking a stand for what you believe in.
Yeah.
So with looking into that, and like at the same time, like Kaepernick still doesn't have a job, but Nike took a great stance on that, like that. What is the responsibility of a company, and what is the best way to look at doing something where it can like have a great positive impact on the community, but also still turn a profit?
Yeah.
Because that's something that's like, again, you need money to tell your narrative.
Sure.
But also at the same time, like it shouldn't be the end-all be-all of directive of your narrative.
Yeah. I think companies are an interesting space when you talk about that kind of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, all the people that work at a company are trying to increase shareholder value. That's their number one mandate, right? But at the same time, the way that you do that is to have an authentic connection with your consumers.
Okay.
I think a lot of African Americans have helped to put Nike in a position where it's a juggernaut in culture. Like people respect the brand. And I think not only just the athletes, but the customers. The whole idea of the sneakerhead culture, right, comes out of urban America. So I think there has to be a way to show homage and pay respect to that while doing business and making a profit and earning money for your stockholders, which is creating value for your stockholders, which is the principal function of the company. Now, when it comes to stuff like Kaepernick, I think, it depends on whose perspective you take. I think some people will tell you Nike was late to the game. Kaepernick had been blacklisted way before the Nike ad, and I know it takes a minute to make an ad, but I've made ads. It doesn't take that long.
How long does it take?
Well, some people would say that the decision of Nike to move forward with that campaign, and again, I wasn't a representative of the company at the time.
Yeah,
the decision for Nike to move forward with that campaign came on the heels of their understanding that Kaepernick was about to win his lawsuit. And Kaepernick won, by some estimates, $80 or $90 million. The number hasn't actually been released, but that's the estimate that people are making that's running on the interwebs about what Kaepernick made when he won his lawsuit. So I think
funny.
Nike, knowing he would win the lawsuit, they say, well, let's be on the right side of history and let's share this campaign with the world. But they still took a risk. There are still people who burnt their Nike shoes. There are still people who protested the fact that Nike was siding with Kaepernick on this particular issue. I think Nike was just doing what they do best, at their best, which is the voice of the athlete. And that ad represented the voice of Kaepernick and people that agreed with Kaepernick and felt the way he did.
So, counterpoint to that.
Sure.
So, there was the whole situation of Nike runners, women, pregnancy, getting their contracts reduced. So, there's two sides to every story of like what you would say is this great, like torch of unity and freedom. At the same time, it has this underside of not so pretty, dialogue of, okay, we're going to cut your contract because you got pregnant. Or you look at things where Serena's getting paid less than Maria Sharapova because, you can read between the lines there potentially. But, by any means, Serena's a more successful tennis player.
I recently saw a comparison of the two of them, their two performances.
So there are missteps there, and like tell me like about like what causes that? What causes those culture? Who makes those decisions to kind of make those missteps?
I think on the women and pregnancy issue, I think, and I'm just
extrapolating.
My perspective. I think that was just a case of Nike's own HR policies not catching up to their sponsorship policies for athletes. I think someone just didn't think about that the way they should have. And come to that conclusion way earlier. I understand they've rectified that today, but I think that should have come way earlier. There should have been better foresight into that potential issue. Nike has a very progressive HR policy with its employees. I just think they didn't extend that to the athletes, and it didn't see it in the same light that they see their employees. That's an oversight, I think. I think the Serena Sharapova thing is not an oversight.
Okay.
I think there was a decision made specifically about who would represent the brand with regard to marketing of tennis, and it really never about one specific sport. To pretend that LeBron James doesn't sell a lot more things for Nike than basketball shoes would be a mistake.
Yeah.
So the person who's representing them in tennis needs to do more for the brand than just represent tennis. But it is clear, and they've done head-to-head comparisons, that there is no comparison between Serena's accolades and what she's done for the sport of tennis and Sharapova. Serena will probably go down as the greatest tennis player to ever play the game of tennis.
One of the greatest athletes in history.
Sharapova, yes, I agree. I agree. Yeah, take it out of tennis. You're right.
Oh, no,
one
I'm
of the
just saying,
greatest, absolutely, 100%. One of the greatest athletes in history.
Her and Muhammad Ali can duke it out.
Will be nowhere on that list. Okay. And yet one athlete was paid a significant amount more than another for a very long time. And I don't see any excuse for that. there were conversations about which one represented the brand better, which one was more aspirational. I think that's all nonsense. If Nike is a company that believes in athletic greatness and telling stories of great athletes, there's no question that one athlete reigns superior over another.
Okay, and I mean, everyone has their missteps and moments and things like that.
Sure, I've had my own.
Which takes us to the funniest thing at that, which this is just a funny, interesting story. Like, you gotta tell me the Steph Curry story. You gotta tell me about like managing Nike basketball and missing Steph. This is a great
Steph
story.
Curry's an amazing athlete. There was a time, and I don't want to make the story bigger than it's supposed to be. There was a time when he was courting a relationship with Nike.
And I think this kind of goes into the whole thing of like sometimes you make missteps.
Yeah, 1,000%. And listen, we had a lot of stuff going on at the time. We have a guy like Kobe, who is one of the premier athletes in the history of the game of basketball, who was headed towards his swan song and the end of his career. We had LeBron, the greatest athlete to play the game of basketball now, the current version, right? The current version of Michael Jordan.
I know.
We had KD. Where do you put him in that list? I mean, KD is easily top 2, top 3 in the league today. And we had Kyrie Irving, who was next up. At this point, he wasn't the Kyrie Irving he is today.
Yeah.
He clearly had next.
Yeah.
And then this kid, and then by the way, we had Paul George, right? So all those athletes need to be attended to by the same folks that are doing the marketing.
It's like my fantasy team in 2020.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And then we had this kid, Steph Curry, come to see Nike. So we went to do a presentation as to why he should bring his talents to our brand. And, I think there were people in his ear saying to him, like, okay, where are you going to rank in priority over there? You're not ahead of Kobe. You're not ahead of LeBron. You're not ahead of KD, right? This is not the Steph Curry you know today. This is Steph Curry
years ago.
Years and years ago.
Yeah.
And so we went in and had a lackluster presentation to Steph because we really didn't see him as having the same potential as the other 5 or 6 athletes that we had in our principal stable of communication vehicles.
Yeah.
And so we went in. There were some errors on the deck, I believe. Some folks I fault myself. I was running basketball. I should have caught those errors.
Okay, Steven.
And it became clear to him that, hey, I'm not a priority just in the presentation. Never mind, after joining, if I joined the squad, what priority would I have? So I think, I'm not saying that was the main reason why he didn't come, but I think it probably factored into his thinking that, hey, what kind of priority am I really going to have over at Nike? And so he made a different decision. If we had to do over again, I think we owed it ourselves to provide an excellent presentation to anyone who comes in our doors, regardless of their potential. We should have done a better job.
Yeah, due diligence.
Absolutely. We should have done a better job telling that story. But again, our cup runneth over at the time with amazing athletes, and it still does for Nike. Just one of those situations.
It is what it is. But I think like in the scheme and the spectrum of what we're talking about, like where we're like looking at Nike as the whole Kapernick kind of like outlier, and then looking at where they are with the women's like pregnancy and contract stuff like that. Like it's like a summarization of like.
I mean, Kaepernick still doesn't have a job, right?
Well, again, this isn't about that. But what I want to get back to is like it's a summarization of parts of Nike, and like thinking of that, and like the brands can make missteps in the way of trying to stay on the right course. And so I think it's like a whole thing of like, like people make mistakes, but as long as they're striving towards the right thing.
There are people who would, and again, this is just my opinion, right?
Okay.
There are people who would say, if Nike really, wants to stand behind Kaepernick, stop writing checks to the NFL. Stop providing the gear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, that wouldn't profit their shareholders.
Absolutely. That would
mean,
be a conflict with their main purpose, which is to create shareholder value. 100%.
Exactly.
But those decisions are made every day. People wake up and make those decisions.
So here's the question for you, and kind of like just to kind of bring things to a little bit of a summarization as far as that goes. What type of things in those companies, and seeing what you've done with Apple, and seeing what you've done with Louis Vuitton, seeing what you've done with Nike and that, would you give to a young person coming into the business of how they can be profitable and still be an activist?
Yeah.
And like make a difference in business in that world and in the community.
Yeah.
Like with the things that you've seen and done. Like how do you do it? What are books you recommend or links you could say, or just it's just some good words of advice that people could look at.
Yeah, I think it starts with listening. The idea of whether it's Nike listening to the athlete or any brand listening to their customers and knowing what matters to their customers. I think it's super important to understand what's of consequence, what matters to your customer, and respect your customer.
Okay.
You know, I think African Americans specifically over-index on a lot of things, consumable items, and I don't find the marketing world to respect African Americans. You know, they're token efforts here and there. There are now people, you know, now most recently in the last 10 years, people in positions of power to be able to change or steer the course of the narrative to those customers, but I don't find a wholesale respect by marketers of African American consumers. And it doesn't matter if it's African American, Hispanic, whatever. I think it starts with respecting your customers, who's putting the bread on your table. Like that's who's making your company, you know, what it is. You have to respect your customer. You have to listen to your customer and understand what matters to your customer in order to respect them in your communication. You know, you take, you know, faux pas. You talked about faux pas before, or mistakes that companies make. You know, you look at the Dove campaigns. You know, I think we talked briefly in the past about those. Like,
Wash
you know,
yourself clean.
when you see the Dove campaign, as a layperson, you see that campaign and you go, "Oh wow, that's kind of an error. That's kind of offensive. That kind of." For me, as a person who was in the system, or was in the system, I look at that and I go, 50 people saw that before it went on air.
Yeah, no, if you're
That's what
looking
it takes.
Well, it's just like, here's the thing when you look at that, like, let's talk.
The
talk,
agency
like,
saw
let's
it, the magazine
logistics.
saw it, the copywriter saw it, the photographer saw it.
production.
Like, everyone saw it.
The DP, the
And
producer,
no one caught that?
script supervisor, like, you know, so that's the thing, and like that's where it comes down to of having different people in the room, having
how
different
many people-
minorities. Like it's like get
many-
some black people in there, get
Right.
Asians in there,
How
get
many
LGBT
woke
in
African
there.
Americans you think were in that process of 50 people for that to come on air? We wouldn't
None.
have come out.
And
So you
here's
do
the-
yourself a disservice by not having people who are woke in the room who can understand and help you navigate those things. The Pepsi commercial, you know, with the, I forget, it was a Kardashian, yes?
Oh yeah.
Really? That's what we need in Ferguson? Stop it. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of mistakes that are made like that. I think it starts with, again, respecting your audience, respecting your customer base, and then understanding what matters to them and providing them communications that speak to the things that matter to them.
Okay, thank you so much, Arturo. I really appreciate you
Thank you,
coming
man.
on the
My
show.
pleasure to be
and
here.
Taking the time.
Let's
It's
do it
like
again soon.
Lots of insight really soon.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.